Hello, welcome once again to Off the Shelf Books on Tour. I'm Veronica Andrews, your host. We have a book today, a debut novel. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
And our author is Meghan MacLean Weir. And the book is Essie. You know, it's a lovely cover, but what a mystery, spirituality, sex, bigotry. Is there anything you didn't get in the pages?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that as I was writing it, there were certain things that I knew that I wanted to include, but we live in a world that's complex.
Well, it's so real. It
Yeah.
really is. But to have woven it so well and so realistically without blatantly hitting anybody over the head with any one thing. But your father is a pastor?
He is. He's an Episcopal priest.
So did he read it?
He did.
And what did he say?
My dad, I think has a lot of similarities to Essie's dad in the Book of Essie, and she lives in a complicated household, and her dad is beloved by the townspeople and beloved by his parishioners and the nation as a whole, but he sort of cedes all of the domestic life to his wife, Celia. And so much like I think Pastor Hicks would respond to something like this, was the same way that my dad responded. He just sort of shrugged and said, good job, and didn't look for any of the sort of deeper connections or deeper sort of inferences about our own family that maybe he could have.
Maybe he didn't want to.
Maybe not. Maybe he was just being polite and supportive.
Well, they
so
say
I appreciated that.
If you're going to write, you should write about what you know.
Yeah.
So that has to come very close to the skin and the heartstrings. You know, did my kid really believe that she grew up in a world that was like that?
Yeah, we've had a lot of conversations about sort of justice and what's appropriate and sort of giving everyone a voice, which I think is a major theme in this book. Before I wrote this book, I wrote a book about being a pediatric resident at Boston Medical Center and Boston Children's Hospital, and that felt very personal. And so when I undertook this novel writing, I fooled myself into thinking that it was fiction and that it was separated from myself and a little less personal in many ways. And I was wrong. When I look back on it, I may not have been totally aware at the time of all of the different ways that who I was growing up and who my family was and, the conversations that we had around the dinner table, how that informed these characters, but it's all there.
But they must have done one hell of a job in raising you to be able to sit as an adult and process that. And congratulations on being a doctor.
Thank you.
And an author. And making your own decisions. And deciding to write it. And we forgot to throw in reality TV. I mean, that's the basis of it all.
Sure, just to make it more interesting.
And who isn't on reality TV? How many other people's lives can you watch? And I wonder, does it really benefit?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think we all sort of wrestle with it, even if we're not the Kardashians or John and Kate plus 8, which I know was very, very popular when I was young and was one of my first experiences of reality television. And I think, my reservations about how appropriate it was to use children in that way as entertainment was a lot of the basis for why I thought this was an important story, not only to tell about Essie and her family, but specifically the aspect of it where it's on reality television. But I think that, I was lucky to have great parents who, tried to teach me what they thought was right, but also taught me to question going forward. And when I was growing up, the Episcopal Church was in quite a period of transition, and there were a couple of different events that occurred sort of during my formative years in young adulthood and adulthood. The Episcopal Church got its first female bishop, and she happened to be African American. My mother referred to that as killing two birds with one stone, that we had sort of made progress in two arenas. And there was quite a lot of backlash at the time of her announcement. And then later, the Episcopal Church sort of welcomed its first gay bishop into a leadership role. And I was not at all involved in the politics behind that. But I think I grew up assuming that church was, this holy, safe place where that you knew what you were getting when you walked through the door. And I don't think I realized until sort of catching glimmers of the conflict that wasn't true, that the church and the people running the church were human, just like all of us, trying to figure it out as they went along, trying to sort of weigh issues of justice with tradition, which I understand. But there were parishes that were torn apart. People left, people broke off. The relationship with the churches in Africa that sort of felt more conservatively about certain issues were challenged.
But the Episcopal Church wasn't the only church.
Sure.
I mean, I think every church has gone through a renaissance, a purification, a realization, and if anything, reality, which I don't think it has been a TV program, but it's probably in the works, that we want to know more. The people today aren't as willing to shush it off. I never could get the difference between the Word of God and the Word of man and how they conflict.
Yeah.
And that, I didn't buy into that one. He and I have a really good relationship, and I got no problem, and thank you God he's got no problem with me. But the interpretation of man and who stands there and says, you will because I said so, I will not.
And the idea that certain people and certain voices are silenced,
Yeah.
either because of their gender or their race or their sexual orientation, I found that sort of very contrary to the loving nature that the church was
Purportedly.
represented as.
Yeah.
And so we think that, Essie and her family are evangelical Christians rather than Episcopalians, which was a choice I made, I think primarily because Episcopalians have quite a lot of rules. And so the idea of writing a story about a family where the father is a very dynamic preacher who sort of sways communities to think the way that he thinks, the Episcopal Church probably wouldn't allow that if it was contrary to their teaching and sort of their structure of hierarchy. Whereas the evangelical churches across the country, sort of are just fascinating communities.
Join,
Yeah.
add, contribute.
Yeah, but it's a little less clear, sort of who's in charge. And I think that there have been instances where individual leaders have wielded quite a lot of power without a great deal of oversight, and have either perpetrated sort of inappropriate discriminatory acts or allowed criminal or sexist acts to be perpetrated with their
Overseen
knowledge.
big time.
Yeah.
Have you had any backlash?
So, I think that there is always backlash. And if you aren't penetrating the market and having people pick up the book who don't already know you or agree with you, then you're not writing a novel that's going to make a difference. The purpose in writing, I think, any book is sort of reaching those readers who are going to feel that the story resonates with them and that it has meaning.
They can identify with.
Yeah.
But you cross so many bridges and you encounter so many things. I don't think there's anybody that didn't get touched by one situation or the other.
Well, so, that's lovely and very flattering to hear. I do think that, my favorite part of reading sort of less positive reviews are that they tend to be from people who sort of say, this doesn't represent Christianity the way that I experience it, which, thank goodness for them, that's great.
Yeah.
But they always seem to read to the end. And so even if it's rubbing them the wrong way, this sort of theme throughout the novel that we really need to re-examine power structures, re-examine what we think is appropriate, re-examine standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves. Even if that's not a conversation that you feel ready or willing to have as you're reading the book, if you've read to the end, even if it's not your favorite book, then I feel like we've made progress. And that the next time you're faced with a sort of moral dilemma or difficult situation, you know, maybe you'll recall these characters and recall sort of how uncomfortable the book made you feel, if that was the case.
Or in talking to your children, because they're growing up in the world that we already learned and we've formed our opinions.
Yeah.
And it's harder to teach us to change.
Yeah.
But these kids with Twitter and Facebook and social media, they're encountering these things every single day. And if they come to you to talk about them, a lot of times I will read whatever my children are reading, so that we have a basis and a foundation for discussion. I may not like the book, I may think it's absolutely nuts. I couldn't get over the Harry Potter phenomenon. And I thought J.K. Rowling was wonderful. That I had never seen a time when you had kids at midnight at a bookstore waiting to buy a book.
So wonderful.
Right, because she didn't insult their intelligence. She put $3 words in every sentence, but by the time they got to the end of the sentence, they knew what it meant.
Sure.
Didn't have to go looking it up. So in reading all the books myself, I had an identity with an entire generation of children. I could walk into a room of 14-year-olds screaming and carrying on and come off as Professor McGonagall with the cape and all, and I'll tell you, that room got quiet pretty quick.
I'm reading Wonder right now with my son, who is 6. And as we were reading last night, he sort of said to me, so Wonder is the story of August Pullman, who has a fairly severe facial malformation that makes him look, you know, frightening to other children. And my son, we were sort of finishing up for the night, and he said, I really wish that someone like Augie would go to my school. And I said, why, bud? And he said, because then I could be his friend and stand up for him. And also, he sounds like a great kid. And I just thought that was, you know, that was so sweet. And I just feel lucky to sort of share those formative moments with him through literature, and to have that be sort of a touchstone for our relationship, but also sort of a way for him to view what's right and wrong when he goes to school and I don't have eyes on him.
Yeah.
And for him to sort of learn that standing up for people is important. You mentioned Harry Potter, which of course I love, but I think one of the other sort of young adult series that I read before starting this book was The Hunger Games. And I work in an emergency department, have worked both at Boston Children's and more recently, most of my shifts have been at Beverly Hospital, just one town over. And I just remember sort of trying to be the cool doctor and read the books that the kids coming in were reading so that I would have that sort of
identity,
ability
that
to relate.
comfortableness, yeah.
Yeah, and so if you say to sort of a 10 or 11-year-old, like, are you like Hermione or are you like Ginny Weasley? You know, they're very willing. Exactly, they're very willing to engage in that conversation. If you say to a teenager, are you a bigger fan of Peeta or Gale? Do you like Katniss? There's this sort of like eye roll that teenagers will give you, just because you're not cool. No. You think you're cool, but they sort of have ownership over that story in a way that I think is wonderful. And I remember the books that were that book for me at that age. But part of the reason the Book of Essie has a teenage heroine is because some of the issues that come up, bigotry, sort of sexual assault, demeaning or demoralizing women, are issues that I don't think we make any progress in tackling if we don't do it across generations. And so I wanted to see if I could create a story that belonged as much to the 16 and 17-year-olds that I see in the emergency department as it does to the adults who sort of relate to the bigger, you know, questions of power.
How young would you give the book to?
Oh, so I will probably let my daughter read it when she is 12 or 13.
I would say 13.
But I understand other people might choose to wait. I think it does touch on some very sort of heavy issues of sexual assault and, you know, and bigger questions of sort of who to bring to justice and who gets a pass in our communities.
And even the falseness of reality TV.
Exactly. But I was very careful to keep the language sensitive and
Swear words, I do appreciate
yeah.
that. It's not necessary.
Well, I swear a lot, and so it didn't have to come across on the page.
I would have never noticed.
Oh no, like a sailor. And so, you know, my kids know all the swear words. They know what's appropriate to say in front of people and what is not appropriate to say in front of people. So we're teaching them that sort of self-control.
Good enough. Are you enjoying this part of it, doing interviews, talking to book clubs, doing readings? Did you expect that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are certain pieces of it that are work. Of course, anyone would say that. The travel and sort of having to put on makeup, which is not something that I do regularly because I typically go to work in scrubs, which are like pajamas, and I pull my hair into a ponytail and I call it a day. But I think that there was a part of myself that was very intrinsic to my personality growing up, that I was someone who loved to read and I was someone who loved literature. I did not view it as I didn't view it as a career that you could aspire to because so few people can make enough money to sort of support themselves as writers. And, you know, I've been very lucky to have the support from my publisher that I do.
You got a publisher.
Yes.
Everybody doesn't.
Yes.
A lot of them are self-published and they crash and burn, but they get published. There used to be a library in Burlington, Vermont, for all the books that never got published.
Oh, that's fun.
And when there was a dearth in the publishing world, the publishers would literally go to this library and review the books that were sitting on the shelf and pull them off and publish those that didn't get consideration during the Harry Potter phrase.
Yeah.
You know? But unfortunately, it's lost its funding, and all the books are now in a, you know, but there's a lot of books out there that, I mean, a lot of it is luck. Time and place and error and what's news and what's happening.
Sure. And I think that's true for any individual thing, but I would imagine that any, you know, aspiring writers out there, this is my first novel. I am published by Knopf, which is just a fantastic publishing house, and all of the people that I have worked with have been lovely and supportive, and people who just really are passionate about storytelling and books and getting them into the hands of readers. But the first novel I wrote more than 10 years ago, and that has not been published, and I've written other things since that have not been published. So luck plays a huge part of it. But also persistence, because if you didn't keep trying, you would never have another chance to get lucky.
Mm-hmm. Do you join a club of aspiring writers? Do you tell them what it's like and how hard it's been or how easy?
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually quite jealous of people who have writing groups and that sort of support. It's not something that I ever had or felt comfortable seeking out when I was writing Essie or the other manuscripts that are just sitting on my shelf waiting for someone to fall in love with them. Because I worked in the emergency department and worked very sort of odd hours and mostly evenings, a lot of weekends, and had 2 small kids, I just didn't feel like I had the emotional bandwidth to sort of open up to other people, to add anything else into my schedule. And I sort of wrote in these spurts where I actually, you know, would be lucky to find some time and would just go at it. And I didn't feel like I could make a commitment to sort of meeting every week or every month with a writer's group.
Well, in a way, I'm glad, though, because I think of the Tropic of Cancer. If he had gone to a group of writers and they told him what they expected him to write, we would have never had the Tropic of Cancer.
That's true.
And I think sometimes the powers to be, and applause to those who have gotten there, and they got there by their way and it worked for them, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for me. And how many pages on the manuscript did you submit and they cut it down?
Well, so in this book, I have been incredibly lucky that it really hasn't changed significantly from the manuscript. I submitted it to my agent, Kirby Kim at Janklow and Nesbitt in New York, who is himself a fantastic editor. And so he identified some of the problem places and sort of tasked me with making some major revisions with a deadline, which was interesting and a challenge in and of itself. And then by the time that we submitted it to the folks at Knopf, he had done a good enough job that, we made some tweaks. And
you still recognized it?
Oh, sure. I mean, and I think that, this is one of those projects where the goal is to sort of get this book out in the world so that we can have these important conversations. And if they don't like my use of some, 16-syllable word,
I didn't have a
I'm
problem,
okay with
thank
that.
you. I didn't have to look up a single word, probably because I'm a mother of 4 daughters. We're going to break, and you're going to read us a passage so that our viewers can get an idea of the symmetry and how cool you are.
Great.
And we will be right back.
This is a passage from the Book of Essie in the first chapter, when we're just hearing about how her family came to be on a reality show. They had a first Christmas special when Maddie was not quite 3, and my parents had just been told that there would be no more children. Daddy had spent so much time on television by then, you'd have thought it would have come naturally, but Mother said he was as nervous as a pig in a bacon factory the day the new crew started filming. Up until then, the cameras had only been at church, where they were entirely under Daddy's control. Could he tell then that the balance of power was subtly shifting? In any case, Mother had to force Daddy to let the crew into the house, and even then he did this thing where he scratched his wrist incessantly any time the cameras were pointed at him. Candy's team did their best to edit this out, to use the close-ups of his pensive expression and his clear blue eyes, but there are a few shots where you can see him moving his fingers back and forth compulsively, as if possessed, like an addict scratching at invisible bugs burrowing just beneath his skin. Mother stole the show, though, so it didn't matter. She cried real tears when she revealed their struggles to conceive, their disappointment. She was candid when she confessed that they had always wanted a big family, a brood, a flock to tend and raise up in His grace and light. After all, if children are a gift from God, surely Daddy was deserving of more than just a single blessing, since he had made it his life's work to speak His truth and praise His name, even in these darkest days. She sighed and reached out then, took my father's hand and stilled it, and held it tight to keep him from scratching. With her eyes turned up to the ceiling, the tears welled at first, but did not fall. Then Mother looked directly at the camera and breathed something about accepting God's will, and those fat drops rolled right down her tastefully rouged cheeks as if she had control over gravity itself. That hour-long special probably would have just been a one-off, since Daddy said the focus should be on his ministry, not on his family. But on Christmas Eve, they found out that Daniel was on the way, and people called it an honest-to-God miracle, and there was no stopping after that. 9 months later, when my brother was born, 10 million people tuned in to see it happen. Not the actual moment, of course, but everything leading up to it. The praying, the hand-holding, the reciting of bits of verse. Then he was lifted, slick and shrieking and still streaked with blood, and Daddy let loose a heartfelt alleluia, and a regular television phenomenon was born.
Well done, as if you were right there. And what did you say, when the boys married, their wives had to agree to having multiple children, and they got a financial bonus?
A little cash incentive.
But that's the part that I don't think people realize is actual, in reality, use of the word, sort of like respect. I think reality is losing its definition in this world. Well done. I would honestly give the book to any one of my daughters for their daughters, especially in this day and time. What a perfect time to open a discussion. And I'd give it to a son, too.
Yeah.
And have a son read it and understand, because I think the good guys get a bum rap in today's news.
Yep. And we all need some more good guys in our lives.
We thank you, God, for those that have crossed our path, and let's hope that others will take their lead. Are you going to do another book?
I would love to be given that opportunity. I'm working on a couple of things now. And it's all a matter of just trying to find some balance between the doctoring, the parenting, and family life, and sitting down and, not driving myself insane.
It hurts every so often when you bang your head against the wall.
Yeah, but I just feel incredibly lucky to sort of have been given this chance, not only to, see Essie out there in the world, but to sort of imagine what could come next. Because I think there's a lot of things that I feel passionately about, and you can't always make a difference sort of in the room that you're in with a patient in the hospital, that there are bigger issues that affect our health, that affect our well-being. And so maybe this is a way that I get to tackle both at the same time.
That's why I'm sitting here in this chair. Thank you for
you.
coming.
Oh, thank you. It was my
Please
pleasure.
come back with good ideas if you just want to run past.
Yeah, I live right down the street.
Good
so.
enough. Would love to have you.
Great. Thank you so much.
That's it for today. Off the Shelf Books on Tour. Our guest has been Meghan MacLean Weir, and the book is Essie. Bye.